Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
But we begin, as we must, with domestic politics. And I kind of wonder whether or not this will work today. We're in an incredibly strange place. I think everyone would agree on that. You have a Conservative Prime Minister threatening Conservative MPs with the withdrawal of the whip if they dare to do to him what he did to the last Conservative Prime Minister. You have a former Conservative Prime Minister taking the current Conservative Prime Minister to court, potentially. You have a very, very recently departed Conservative Chancellor of the Exchequer essentially accusing his successors in Cabinet of lying to the British people. And I think it's a matter of fact rather than opinion that he's right. And you can prove that by going to the most right-wing of British journalists, for Daily Mail columnist Richard Littlejohn, of course, last week, explicitly stating that they believe Boris Johnson is lying to the British people and they love it. That's a weird development. I pointed it out to you last week. You know, the idea of a journalist applauding a politician for lying, consciously lying, hasn't even happened in America. Trump's cheerleaders in America pretend that they believe he's not lying. They don't actually stand up and say, I know he is lying and I love it. That's an astonishing new low in the history of Britain, actually, but certainly in the history of the British media and its relationship with politics. What do you expect journalists to do, whether you like them or loathe them? Hold politicians to account. It's all we can do. Cheer them for lying? Very, very dark days, very odd times. 6 minutes after 10. So, looking for new avenues of conversation, new things we can do together. I don't mind returning to familiar territory, but I do every morning hope to stumble across something that we haven't done before. And I think events give us that opportunity today. Here it is, okay? One of the things that's been very frustrating for the last couple of years has been this accusation of bad faith that was levelled at Theresa May. I hold no torch for Theresa May. I absolutely hold no torch for her. Her performance at the Home Office, never mind Downing Street, was nation-shaming in its callousness and incompetence. But the idea that she wasn't trying to get us out of the European Union was palpably absurd. As you know, it was part of the denial of reality on the part of hardcore Brexiters. Rather than admit that it was either very, very difficult and or impossible to secure terms preferable to what we had to start with, they had to attack the players, rather than the ball. So the best way of doing it was Theresa May never meant it, she was a Remainer. Theresa May, Philip Hammond, yada yada, he was a Remainer. And I find that ridiculous and heartbreaking in the context of the national humiliation that it's inflicted upon us on the world stage. But I don't think it's fair to deny its plausibility in the minds of people desperate to believe that it was true. So why haven't your unicorns arrived? Answer, because Theresa May and Philip Hammond don't believe in unicorns. Why haven't we managed to get to the sunlit uplands? Why am I not having my cake and eating it? Probably, I think everybody has abandoned the hope of seeing 350 million quid a week for the NHS. Remember, that was written by Dominic Cummings, that slogan on the side of the bus, the man now pulling the strings in Downing Street. But I'm trying to be fair to people who I find, I'm sorry, but I find it a bit ridiculous. Doesn't mean I don't like you. Some of my best friends are ridiculous. Some of my favourite colleagues. I'm looking at you, Keith. So anyway, there's nothing wrong with being a bit ridiculous, all right? It's good. It's for the general gaiety of the nation. It adds to the national pageant. But it was ridiculous to suggest that Theresa May and Philip Hammond and others or certainly Theresa May was not doing her level best to get an agreement with the EU27 that she could then put to Parliament. And of course, that Parliament contained people now in the Cabinet who voted both for and against the withdrawal agreement, but they're now claiming to be consistent and trustworthy. So take that thought. The reason why things didn't work out, the reason why we kept hearing all this bad stuff, the reason why the impact assessments were so uniformly negative, the reason why the government's own explanations of what no deal would entail were so uniformly negative, right? That was because the Prime Minister was a Remainer. I'll let you have that. I don't think it's true, but for the purposes of today's interactions, I'll let you have that. So now you have in Downing Street the co-leader of Vote Leave, Boris Johnson. Park for a moment. I did tell you, I think 2 months ago before I went on holiday, to start your clock for Farage to start claiming that he wasn't Brexity enough, and then I noticed while I was on holiday that Farage had started doing exactly that. I don't think anyone gets any prizes for predicting the plodding patheticness of that man anymore, but hey, if there are any prizes out there, I'll have that one as well. So, because of course the alternative is to admit reality, and if you can't admit reality, you have to keep attacking the people trying to cope with reality. It's not Theresa May anymore, it's Boris Johnson. They're trying to cope with the same reality, and they're responding in more or less the same way, talking and waiting for the clock to go down and trying to pass the buck towards anyone other than themselves. But now you can't really do that. If you chaired Vote Leave and you're Prime Minister, no one can really accuse you of being a secret Remainer, can they? No one can really accuse you of trying to frustrate Brexit because you campaigned for it. You actually, in the case of Boris Johnson, you were the difference between it being achieved and not being achieved. So now, and I'm speaking with love to people who still apparently sit on the other side of this argument, love and concern, because now he has very deliberately assembled a cabinet that consists of the most hardcore leavers in Parliament. And the government's own assessments are still unremittingly negative. I suppose you could argue that the civil service had been hobbled, but when are you going to actually wake up to yourself? When are you going to say, oh, actually, do you know what, maybe it's true, as opposed to constantly shooting the messengers? So I'll let you shoot May, the messenger, but you can't shoot Johnson, can you? You can't shoot Gove. You can't shoot the people in the cabinet now, as the government's own assessments of no deal continue to be, a veritable cavalcade of catastrophe, potentially, and in some cases actually. And that leads me to today's question, which is, as everyone else is talking about a general election, I think we need a referendum, don't we? We need a referendum where the government campaigns to leave, but wherein and whereby they are compelled to release to all of us the information that they're receiving from their own departments and experts about what a no-deal Brexit would actually mean. Now, why would you not want that? So you've got a Leave government campaigning to leave the European Union in the same way that the last one campaigned to remain. But we didn't believe the impact assessments and the forecasts put out by the last lot because they were on the other side of the argument. They were wearing a different coloured scarf. Now, you've got a cabinet full of full-kit bankers. They're not just wearing the scarf, they're wearing the whole shebang. They've even got the away kit and the socks and everything. So if that government is forced to put out its proposals, its forecasts, its assessments of what no deal would mean, then we'd actually get a fair referendum, wouldn't we? Here is your Leave government campaigning for leave, but being honest with you about what that would mean. So no deal on one half of the referendum. And here is the Remain campaign, also being honest with you about what that would mean, because they're relying upon the same information provided by the same government, which can no longer be accused of indulging in Project Fear because it's a Leave government. It's even got Jacob Rees-Mogg in it, insulting neurologists on national radio for telling him about what might happen in the field of neurology. How dare they? How dare some neurologist think he knows more about neurology than Jacob Rees-Mogg? It's ridiculous. So, what do you reckon? General election or referendum? 0345 6060 973. Doesn't matter where you're coming from on this, and you're not allowed to choose neither, which I think, for the record, is probably the most likely outcome in the short term, actually. I can't see. I think it might backfire, for the record. I think that they've overreached. The problem is, when you win a referendum by lying, cheating and breaking the law, and then it turns out to be very difficult to deliver what that lying, cheating, law-breaking campaign promised to a multitude of people, it's always seemed to me unlikely to be effective to bring in the architect of the lying, the cheating and the law breaking to deliver that thing that's proved impossible to deliver. You can win a referendum by lying, cheating, breaking the law and getting into bed with Farage's racist rump. You could even win an election by exaggerating, bluffing, lying and getting into bed with Farage's racist rump. But you can't govern. You can't do detail. You can't do compromise. You can't do expertise. You can't do evidence-based policy making. That's a bit dull. For that you need honest brokers. So what do you prefer? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. In the interest of clarity and fairness, referendum or election? Election or referendum? For the record, seeing as I have to put myself out there before I can invite you to do the same, I'm a fairly well-documented critic of Jeremy Corbyn, but if it came down to a choice between Jeremy Corbyn winning an election or a no-deal Brexit ushered through by Boris Johnson, I'd be Corbyn all day long. Thankfully, I have a Labour MP who I rather like and admire in my own constituency, which makes the decision a little bit easier than I was expecting it to be. But if you turn it into no-deal versus Corbyn, then it's a no-brainer, I'm afraid, for anybody who cares about this country. And finally, if you voted for Brexit because you are in the construction industry and you felt that your livelihood had somehow been undermined or damaged by immigration, I've got some fairly troubling news for you after this as well. But we begin with this question. What do you want, an election or a referendum? And I don't think you're allowed neither. And before you answer the question, absorb my observation. You can't claim that the government impact assessments or the government forecasts or government advice is biased or flawed in favour of Remain when you've got a cabinet full of leavers. You see? Possibly he was naked all along. Possibly. Brenda from Bristol became the byword for, what was it, lack of enthusiasm about the prospect of a general election. I mean, there are arguments for why you should have one. The current Conservative government campaigned on a manifesto to leave the European Union in an orderly fashion with a negotiated deal. There was a throwaway line in there about no deal being better than a bad deal, which bad faith actors will pretend was the manifesto pledge, as opposed to the codified line about leaving in an orderly fashion with a negotiated deal. That was what the manifesto pledge was. That is now off the table, potentially. What do you want, an election or a referendum? 0345 6060 973. Because, really, the big fly in the ointment of covering this over the last few years has been the belief, deliberately fostered and fermented by the usual suspects, the usual dissemblers and deceivers, that Theresa May was somehow not committed to Brexit. She was secretly trying to frustrate it. But you can't say that anymore, which means that the advice the government is getting from its own experts, from its own people, can no longer be dishonestly dismissed as, quotes, Project Fear, end quotes. It's Boris Johnson's government. It's a cabinet full of leavers. So let's have a referendum, he cautiously suggests. Fiona is in Kendal in Cumbria. Fiona, what would you like to say?
I'd just like to say I totally agree that we need a referendum. And I had this idea, and it came from nowhere a couple of days ago, and just thought, what we actually need a referendum that is truly just advisory, and make that clear, and actually gather some data about where the country's at. I'm sick of people telling me what I voted for, what I thought, what I think now. They don't know.
Do you know, I'm not even going to ask you what you voted for or what you think now, because it highlights the problem you describe. But I don't buy that rhetoric, you know. When I say that 17.4 million people didn't vote for a no deal, I only have to find one that didn't. It's the other lot who say 17.4 million people did vote for no deal. Oddly, it's another example of the untruths and the dishonesties being undertaken by the people accusing the other side of it. I have to find one person out of 17.4 million that would rather remain in the European Union than leave with no deal. And I can find it, I can lick my finger now, stick it in the air and find 1,000. So that is a really misleading piece of rhetoric, isn't it? To claim that you're telling me what I voted for, you're telling me I didn't know what I voted for. But you have to find one person who did that. But why advisory? God knows. I mean, we want some clarity, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. That is where it falls down. But it gets us out of that accusation. Oh, not another referendum. We voted once. We voted to leave. Let's get out. If we had a referendum that clearly stated we've got a representative democracy. Our representatives need to actually know where the country's at, instead of guessing or using the knowledge gap. They don't know, so they can abuse and use that knowledge gap. We need some actual evidence.
Yes, and how naive am I being when I say that if we have a Leave government like we do now, then Leavers won't be able to dismiss evidence as being project fear or bias because it's come from people on their team. I'm probably being a bit naive because I'm being rational.
Yeah, that's what I feel is the danger with it. I've got this idea that if every constituency voted in a genuinely advisory, clearly stated advisory referendum, so that every MP knew exactly what their constituency now thinks and feels, it would lead to some great celebration of truth.
It could be 50-50 again, couldn't it? I mean,
it could.
But what would you want on the referendum? Because oddly, I think the likelihood of Boris Johnson getting Theresa May's deal through Parliament is higher than it has been since it was actually agreed with the EU 27.
I think, in all fairness, they should put the lot on the referendum and have some kind. And it would also.
Yeah, they won't let you though. They won't let you because you'll split the Leave vote. So deal and no deal become two sides of the Leave coin, and then no Brexit becomes the Remain coin.
But if there was a rating thing, if you had a rank order of what you'd like, I just would like there to be a debate in Parliament based on what the country, where the country really is at, regardless of where it's at. I think we may both be guilty of
naivety or optimism or undue, positivity, and thinking that actually we could somehow render it evidence-based. We could drag it back from the cultish and psychological to the intellectual and political, and even that, I suppose, sounds condescending and sneering to people who are firmly embedded in their beliefs about things that evidence currently contradicts. Referendum or election, it's 1-0 for referendum. Is this going to break down according to what you think would happen? I don't know. A general election, it would be ridiculous to allow Boris Johnson to get away with crashing out of the European Union and somehow ending up able to have a general election before the full impact has registered. And speaking of impact, I'm just going to draw to your attention in a moment that story about the construction industry. It's very interesting, or maybe not as interesting as it appears at first glance to a layman, to an amateur like me, but given that even as recently as a few weeks ago, I had people ringing me who worked in buildings saying that they voted to leave the European Union because their wages had been driven down by Eastern Europeans who sleep 14 to a room and send all their money back to Bratislava. It presumably is going to be good news for them that we're leaving the European Union. We'll find out shortly. Simon's in Stratford-upon-Avon. Simon, what do you reckon?
Hi there, James.
Hello.
I am very much an ardent Remainer, have been throughout. I'd like to say I do not want a referendum, a second referendum. I think, in fact, our odds of remaining in the EU were probably higher in the first referendum. There's no guarantee. And if we lose again, then what arguments do we have to stand up to then? We don't have anything left.
Nothing changes. I mean, in some ways, that would be quite welcome because it would mean we all have to shut up and get on with it.
No, I want everybody who wants to remain to push to revoke Article 50.
Without any democratic mechanism, without any vote.
Oh, absolutely. And
okay.
say let's revoke.
You really are hardcore.
50.
You really are hardcore. You know the score.
I am, and I'm not, because I would be saying to them, right, okay, we've seen the vote that came through. That's noted. We appreciate that. But now we'll give the Leavers 3 or 5 years, however long they want, to actually come up with a credible plan.
Yeah, but you know that they can't.
Well, you say that. I mean, I don't know if they can or they can't.
I do. At risk of sounding like Digby Pudding Jones, I know that they can't come up with a plan that would constitute a better status quo than membership of the European Union. They know that as well.
I do agree with you, but they can be allowed the time to actually set out a framework where they can say, okay, well, That's what the automotive industry needs. Here's our alternative. That's what around here.
Here's the construction. Construction output dropped for the fourth consecutive month in August 2019, which has seen orders for new construction drop for the biggest drop for 10 years. Last month alone, and the lack of optimism within the business has not been so bleak since December 2008.
I totally agree with you. Perhaps I am being disingenuous because I know as well as you do there's no better alternative. But give them the time, 3 to 5 years.
This is where I use the word naive, because we're still waiting for the penny to drop. How long do you really look at someone like Marc Francois? Do you think there is a penny capable of dropping in that mutton-headed
skull? Well, there may or may not be, but also by the time that 3 or 5 years has elapsed, the new tax rules and regulations in the EU have come in, and a lot of these problems may well have disappeared.
We shall see. So you don't want a referendum or a general election? I was adamant that was not an option that you were allowed to offer up on the programme, and yet you got on second.
I don't want a referendum. As far as a general election is concerned, well, yes, I do want a general election because I don't care what it takes to get Boris out of there. I mean, I cannot stand Jeremy Corbyn. I actually voted Lib Dem in the last couple.
Where's Jo Swinson at the moment? Does anyone see her?
Well, this is what I was going to say. I hate Jeremy Corbyn. I cannot stand him. I cannot stand him. But I would actually vote for him now. Actually, it wouldn't make a difference where I live because this is very much a Tory stronghold in Stratford.
But I tell you, it's Nadeem Zahawi, I think, isn't it? Your MP.
Right.
But that's by the by. I'm interested in where your heart and head are at the moment, and I suspect there'll be a lot of people like you who I wouldn't necessarily go quite as far in my condemnation of Jeremy Corbyn on a personal level, but I find him ridiculous as a political operator. But I would also vote for his Labour Party because compared to Boris Johnson, he might as well be Superman. Andy's in Gatwick. Andy, I'll come to you first after the news. It's half an hour shot by. We are looking at referendum versus election, pretending that we live in a rational universe with honest brokers, with prime ministers that don't get applauded by some of the most powerful journalists in the country when they tell lies, by journalists who don't even pretend anymore that they don't think it's a lie. We are as far down the rabbit hole as it's possible to imagine being without moving firmly into the realms of the sinister. How do we make it stop? Ask the people. What do we ask them? Referendum or election? Has to be a referendum with a government that you can't accuse of being Project Fear. So finally we can trust the information coming from the only information sources that we have. Yeah, all right, James. Dream on. Where the prospect of another election, a general election, I think it's fair to say doesn't fill many of us with absolute joy. Some Labour supporters very keen, not least because they managed to reverse a 20-point opinion poll lead last time. Jeremy Corbyn ultimately didn't beat Theresa May, of course, and most people would expect Boris Johnson to perform better in the country than Theresa May, but wouldn't really change anything. No deal has, by hook and by crook, become something that many people claim they voted for, or many campaigners claim 17.4 million people voted for. It's a denial of reality. It's a straight lie. You only have to find one person who voted Leave and has changed their mind, let alone one person who would still like to leave, but not with no deal, to make an utter mockery of that observation. But it's too late to reverse the utter mockery that much of the media has become. So instead, you have a choice between an election and a referendum. And in the interest of clarity and honesty, surely a referendum could now take place because you've got to leave government, which means that impact assessments everywhere from the Department of Health through to the Department of Trade and Industry can't be dismissed as Ramona propaganda. They've come from ministries that are headed by Leavers, which means, of course, it's never going to happen because that would put them in the very difficult position of campaigning for something that their own department described as ridiculous. How on earth do you avoid that sort of thing? Well, here's a clue. The International Trade Committee has just today received confirmation, breaking news this, by the way, from the Department for International Trade that the Secretary of State, Liz Truss MP, has declined its invitation to appear before the committee prior to the prorogation of Parliament, which is due to take place next week. Department of International Trade. Yeah. But you remember, you're supposed to believe, if you're still swallowing the Kool-Aid, you're supposed to believe Boris Johnson when he said he's proroguing Parliament to get on with the business of government. It's got nothing to do with frustrating democracy, accountability or transparency. International Trade Committee has received confirmation from the Department for International Trade that the Secretary of State has declined its invitation to appear before the committee. That's the difference, I think, between prorogation and and recess. I think in recess you can still have select committees sitting. I could be wrong about that, but there are differences. And there it is. Because what would be the first question you asked Liz Truss? For me, it would be, this South Korea deal that you boasted about, is that exactly the same as the terms and conditions that we already have with South Korea as members of the European Union? Or is it inferior? Because if it's exactly the same or inferior, you shouldn't really be celebrating it, should you? You promised, or Brexit promised, that things would be better than what we currently have. And to avoid answering that question, she has declined to appear before the relevant select committee. So much control. Andy's in Gatwick. Andy, what made you pick up the phone?
I'd just like to say, James, I'd love another referendum, basically.
Go on.
To, just give myself and maybe other people like me who voted to leave, which I now know sort of false pretences and was sort of duped, taken in by all the false rhetoric, really.
And I mean, again, I find myself reaching backwards now to say it wasn't all false rhetoric. Some of it seemed plausible. Some of it, I get, as you know, Andy, I'm such a snowflake. I get a bit sensitive when I sense people are beating themselves up. There was so much effort and money put into persuading you, and law breaking put into persuading you to do what you did, that you shouldn't feel bad about it. Why a referendum rather than an election? Why would that be more desirable to you?
Because, well, I just personally think if there was another referendum, it would go the other way this time. Because I'm a taxi driver and I pick a lot of people up.
Yes.
And a lot of people voted to leave, like myself,
yes,
you know, for similar sort of reasons. And now sort of the complexities of it have come out over the last 3 years, and I'm more aware of what it's about, sort of. And so I still struggle, it still does my head in.
You and me both, Andy.
But what done it for me as well yesterday, when the guy phoned up and Jacob Rees-Mogg just totally insulted him on the road. I don't know, it just made me feel really bad.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? If you've lined up behind Rees-Mogg and then you suddenly see what he really is, what he really represents, it takes a bit of honesty, a bit of courage to admit that you'd been mugged, that you'd fallen for it. And a general election wouldn't allow you to have clarity on this specific question. Because I don't like the way that Brexit has broken down along left, right or party lines. I think that's a misrepresentation. I think there's people of every hue who would vote differently in a referendum from how they would in a general election. So it would be a more honest question. Do you still want to leave, or do you want to... Because the only way in which you're going to leave is with no deal. Do you want that, or do you want just to go back to as we were and get on with the business of ideally stopping sending cretins to Brussels and sending decent candidates and decent politicians instead?
Yes.
There you go. And Andy is my man. That's my finger licked. Finger in the air. All I've got to do is find one person who's changed their mind, and the rhetoric of will of the people and 17.4 million becomes ridiculous. But I'm being rational, so it won't be buttering any parsnips in some corners of the country. Thank you, Andy. Interesting perspective from the taxi driving point of view. Normally, even if a taxi driver doesn't recognise me and starts banging on about leaving, even I don't get involved. But the idea that passengers are now saying, I've changed my mind, is interesting. Anthony's in Brighton. Anthony, what would you like to say?
I think it's very nice to talk to you, actually.
Well, obviously, but why did you ring in? Election or referendum?
Election, I think.
Okay.
Basically, because I think we need a bit of a shake-up. Because I think what we've got is a lot of...
So you wouldn't want either candidate... I mean, you wouldn't want Johnson to win, then?
I'd like to see Farage win, to be honest with you.
In a general election?
General election. I think that put the cat amongst the pigeons.
Yes. So you don't want calmness and unity?
To be honest with you, until we end up staying in the EU, right, which is basically what the EU want and what they're controlling, like cancer has spread amongst various people, yourself included.
Yes, tell me what you mean by that, Anthony.
The EU wants to have control of everything. We want independence. The EU don't want us to be independent.
Well, what do you mean by independent?
We want to have our own government telling us what to do rather than the European...
So what do they tell you what to do at the moment?
Well, they make laws.
So what do they tell you? Yeah, what do they tell you what to do?
Well, they tell everybody what to do. They control everything.
For example?
EU regulations on emissions for cars, EU regulations on emissions, like everything.
So you want to be free to have a more polluting car?
I want to be free to make my own decisions.
But you won't be. You just said you wanted to be told what to do by your own government.
Well, if that's what they choose, but at least we've elected these people.
Well, you also elected Nigel Farage, didn't you, to be an MEP?
That's right.
Yeah.
But he has no master control over the EU.
But you're against master control. You just said you were against that.
That's right. I am against master control. He doesn't have any control in the EU.
So apart from wanting our children to breathe dirtier air, what else do you feel aggrieved about?
It's all right picking on that. What I'm saying
I'm only picking on the only example you've given, Anthony. You can't shoot the messenger, mate.
The point I was trying to make, that was just an example.
Yes, and I want some better examples, if you don't mind.
Okay. 437 laws on hand towels. Is that necessary?
On what?
That's just red tape on hand towels.
Name one.
What?
Name one of those laws.
I don't know, because I've never
Here you are
into
on
it.
national radio spouting lines that you can't support. Give me one example of the 437 laws that you're unhappy about.
I think there's regulations on the size.
The size of you think there's regulations on the size of hand towels, and this is your evidence of being controlled. So you want dirtier air and enormous hand towels. Or tiny ones, I'm not clear. Is it tiny ones you want or enormous ones?
I don't think there's any necessity to have laws on a hand towel.
But you don't know what they are.
But any law on a hand towel is ridiculous.
You don't know. You
don't know
what. You can't really expect me to continue this conversation now. You use the analogy of cancer, and when I've asked you for examples of the symptoms of what you call a cancer, you're talking gibberish about hand towels and claiming that you want to breathe dirtier air. Go on, third time lucky, Tony. Fill your boots.
I don't. I love you. You're great. You're just brilliant at making people look stupid.
No, nothing to do with me, Anthony. I just hold up mirrors. It's not my fault what you see. So let's have another crack. You want dirtier air and giant hand towels. What's the other evidence of Brussels controlling your life?
I just want our government to be our government.
Yeah, the example of control?
Well, the government that we've elected to be telling us what to do.
Right, so if this government told you that you had to have emission controls on your cars and you weren't allowed enormous hand towels, you'd be happy with that, would you?
Because it would be their decision that we've elected.
Yeah, but it's their decision to enshrine laws that are passed collectively in the European Union, Anthony.
Yeah, but they don't choose.
Yes, they do.
European.
Yes, no, they do, which is why you can't name any. So before you go, one last chance, because I'd hate you to feel you weren't given a fair crack of the whip. We want dirtier air and enormous hand towels, although we can't actually identify any laws, despite claiming that there are 437. We can't name any of them. What's the other big platform that proves your point about Brussels exercising undesirable control over us?
Brussels, because the fact that not right at the moment.
It's not a trick question.
Wait a few years.
Yes,
right?
just one more example, because I think hand towels and clean air haven't really worked for you. So give me the other one.
When they dissolve our British Army.
When they dissolve our British Army.
That's right.
Right, you are, mate.
That's the future.
Nancy, I think you need to go back to bed. 10:45. I think probably that Michael Gove's lie is more significant than Boris Johnson's. Michael Gove's lie, of course, picked up on this programme by Lord Kerr, one of the authors of Article 50, pointed out that in 26 years as a public servant, he never told a lie. He added, it's a mistake to tell a lie because you tend to be found out and then the public won't trust you again. It would have been a resignation issue once. Michael Gove claimed that a document leaked, Operation Yellowhammer document leaked, had come from July. And I think he even suggested it had been leaked by a former minister in the last Conservative government. It subsequently turned out that it hadn't. It was up to date. It was something that had been revised during Boris Johnson's premiership. I presume Gove knew that because he wouldn't wade in. He even said we don't normally comment on leaks when he tweeted it. So for Lord Kerr, I sat here agog, not aghast, agog, big difference. Don't get your gogs and your ghasts mixed up. Because that would have been huge news once. Government minister accused of lying by a former ambassador, senior civil servant, the man who actually wrote Article 50. But I think that lie is more significant. And of course, Gove's lie, I don't think, has been cheered by journalists like Richard Littlejohn. I don't think he's said, I love being lied to by Michael Gove. He's made it clear he loves being lied to by Boris Johnson. So Gove's lie is arguably more significant because that means that they are actually prepared to lie about the advice that they're receiving from their own experts. That's astonishing. You saw a touch of it with Rees-Mogg yesterday, with David Nichols, the neurologist who wrote much of the relevant parts of Operation Yellowhammer. And he was just insulted by Jacob Rees-Mogg, who seemed to think he knew more about neurology and the impact of a no-deal Brexit upon neurology than this senior consultant neurologist did, which kind of sums everything up. Takes us neatly to Andy in Gatwick, who's sitting in his cab yesterday, listening to that and thinking, how the hell did I ever end up on the same side as this shyster? He's insulting a neurologist who is motivated only by concern for his patients and by association his entire country. So what works best to get us out of this, an election or a referendum? I cautiously suggest a referendum because the government wouldn't be able to lie about its own impact assessments, and Leavers wouldn't be able to accuse the government of Project Fear and secretly wanting to remain because it's a government full of Leavers, but we already know that Gove is prepared to lie about it. So maybe even my optimism about a referendum is misplaced because the scale of duplicity and dishonesty in British politics now on the Leave side of the debate is unprecedented, culminating in a fascinating piece by Peter Foster of the Daily Telegraph this morning, suggesting, and it's double-sourced, and I've known Pete since I was 14 years old, so I'm perfectly happy to vouch for his integrity and credibility, a double-sourced story claiming that the whole business about claiming that we're still negotiating with the European Union is a sham, and Dominic Cummings has said so in company. Downing Street have denied that, but Downing Street know that when they lie, they get cheered by the most powerful journalists in the country. Actually cheered for lying. So what price a denial from Downing Street now that we know that their cheerleaders in the media actively enjoy being lied to and boast about it in their Daily Mail columns? Democracy, hey? How's that working out for you? Control, transparency, accountability? Whew, thank God we're not allowed giant handtails. Will's in Camberwell. Will, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. For background, I consider myself to be an optimistic European, brackets British, English, Cornishman in descending order of relevance. And I've come to the position that we need, as Alan Sugar used to say, with regret, a second referendum. There's no way out of this otherwise. The pans are boiling over all over the shop. The Leavers have been for quite a long time, but even Remainers, I've heard, getting angrier and angrier. I'm watching out of bottom of the Sky News here, and you can see all the flags, people shouting over the top, and it's going mental. It's going crazy. The election's not going to help because it's too much of a mess. The numbers, for me, do not lie. Anyone could win, and who knows what would happen afterwards. We need to go back to the referendum, add some more democracy to the system. Everybody is more informed than they were.
Well, some people are, some people aren't. Forgive me, I don't like the old esprit d'escalier once people have already departed, but there are still people out there talking about handtails and cars being too clean, wanting more pollution. The only, just for the record, if he's still listening, the only thing I've been able to find about legislation and handtails involves laws that are designed to stop poisonous or dangerous chemicals being used in the construction of sanitary trails. So we want dirtier air and dangerous sanitary towels, apparently, for our man on the line a moment ago. So not everybody is better informed.
Well, I think even if any...
Despite my best efforts, Will.
You hear other adverts, you hear other points of view, don't you? And I think they sink in, and in the privacy of the ballot box, even though you're waiting for your unicorns to sort of drop through the ceiling, you just think, let's forget about all this. And do you know what? The thing that's going to be years of negotiation afterwards, that's got to be the worst serious implication if you're a strong Leaver.
See, you look at... we picked on Gove. Here's an interesting thing, and I would have thought, if I'd voted to leave, I don't understand why I would, why people are still getting cross with people who turned out to be right, instead of getting cross with the people that lied to me. It's why I thought Andy's call was so interesting. Here's a speech from Michael Gove pre-referendum. There is a free trade zone stretching from Iceland to Turkey that all European nations have access to, regardless of whether they are in or out of the Euro or EU. After we vote to leave, we will remain in this zone.
Well, there's that, isn't there, James? There's another thing as well, a regulation which I fear, pointless, evil regulation, which I fear you may have missed, actually. On the 10th of January 2020, when we're, fingers crossed, away from this evil empire with the wind in our hair, comes in the 5th money laundering directive from the European Union, which I'm reading from the website. It will address a number of weaknesses in the EU's regime to come to light since the enactment of the 4th. I mean, just think of that regulation that's going to pour down on exotic financial instruments.
And you look at newspaper ownership, it becomes a particularly pertinent question, and I was guilty myself of not poo-pooing it, but filing it perhaps under more extreme, less plausible rationales. But as the years have passed and we still haven't been given one tangible benefit, one positive reason for ordinary people to want to leave the European Union, hand towels and polluting cars notwithstanding, 3-pin plugs and newspaper wrapped fish and chips notwithstanding, you have to start asking yourself, where are they getting their information from, these people? And why would the providers of that information be so keen for us to leave the European Union? And Occam's razor, being employed in the traditional fashion, could lead you to the conclusion that that's the only explanation left. Why do the owners of the Daily Bugle and the Sentinel and the Daily Planet, why are they all still slavishly telling you that leaving the European Union is a good idea, despite having given up on telling you any reasons whatsoever why you should desire it or your life would improve, apart from lies and exaggerations? Answer, because it will actually affect them negatively to stay, even though leaving will affect you positively. Norman's in Tenerife. Norman, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
nice
mate.
to speak to you. And keep flying the flag, sir.
How are things? Because I know there were a lot of fires on Gran Canaria. Is Tenerife all right?
No, it's on Gran Canaria. I mean, we have had fire. Last year, actually, you had a serious fire in the north of the island where I am.
Nasty business.
But it's not uncommon, unfortunately, this time of the year. But the worst thing is a lot of them have started deliberately, which is the main concern.
Same in Greece, planning, and same in Brazil, in the Amazon forest. Anyway, we digress. Why did you ring in today?
We do slightly, yes. So I'm a staunch Remainer, for good reason, I hope. But,
yes.
The original referendum, or a referendum, would be the way forward, purely and simply because it focuses on the issues. There's always a risk with a general election. You will end up where you are now.
Yeah.
Plus,
well, you still could with a referendum, but you'd have to have some sort of final clause, not you know, this is it, this is game over. If the country votes to leave with no deal, we've all got to help deal with the mess that would create.
Exactly. Well, I am democratic, and I don't sort of, hopefully, don't put my head in the sand and sort of don't listen to anything. But yes, if it did go against
and all of these politicians, I wonder whether Tenerife gives you a fresher perspective on these matters, because I can't answer this question. All of these politicians who talk about the will of the people, why won't they ask the people?
Exactly, because they're feared of the response.
You'd have to think that, wouldn't you? They're not as confident as they could be.
No,
we could say.
I don't think so. My eldest daughter lives and works. She has dual citizenship. I remarried in 2008, and my first wife was German. I don't make a habit of collecting wives, by the way, but it's far too expensive.
Yes.
But the fact is, my eldest daughter is in Frankfurt. She works within the financial infrastructure there, and it's very, very clear that the Germans, or the powers that be, so to speak, they just have a view that, well, if that's what you want to do, you know, the UK
this is
asphyxiation that we're overly concerned with what Europe's.
Well, I don't know if you've seen the other story about how they're thinking of sort of categorising a no-deal Brexit as an emergency, which would free up central funds to be sent to businesses and countries that are particularly badly hit by it. And we're still sitting here, still taking calls from people saying, I'm not going to do a silly voice, that would be unfair, but a lovely lady yesterday who used to sell pest control products, claiming that her experience of negotiations gave her a better insight into the negotiations with the European Union than perhaps others among us enjoyed. It's arrant nonsense. All you've got to do is cast a cursory eye over the European media, even the Irish media, which is, you know, mostly in English, so it's not that hard to read or understand. And we're still, and that's why the story from Peter Foster, which Downing Street have denied that they've got no intention. They know full well that there's not going to be any deal or any movement. Seems so plausible. It's the only thing that actually makes sense. Otherwise, they are still crossing their fingers and promising you unicorns. And here's a funny one. You know, I'm a bit of an archaeologist when it comes to Brexit at the moment. This is Michael Gove speaking before the referendum. My thanks to I'm Incorrigible for holding my shovel. The day after we vote to, or indeed lending me his trowel. The day after we vote to leave, we hold all the cards and we can choose the path we want, said Michael Gove, just three and a bit short years ago. The leader of the In campaign, Stuart Rose, has acknowledged that there will be no turbulence or trauma on Independence Day. Of course, Gove presumably is among those leavers claiming that the Remain campaign actually did explain what leaving the European Union would entail, but back then he was focusing on the one that didn't. Nothing is going to happen if we come out in the first 5 years, probably, he confessed and admitted. There will be absolutely no change, said the leader of Vote Leave, who is now reassuring us that we will have enough food. So, if you voted for him then, are you really still voting for him now? The bloke who told you we will hold all the cards is now telling you we will have enough food, but claiming that somehow the vote you cast when he was coming out with crud like that is still valid. That's the fundamental flaw at the heart of what's going on. And then I often think it's the questions that we can't answer on the programme that are the best. Obviously, it doesn't lend itself to rip-roaring radio. I just sit here repeating a question that no one answers. But we did 2 hours yesterday asking why Leavers think somebody like Dominic Grieve is prepared to sacrifice his career potentially upon the altar of his principles over something like Brexit. Why somebody like Justine Greening has now, as I suggested to you people would start doing yesterday, dashed her own dreams of politics, dreams of being in Parliament. She has decided she can't do that anymore, not in this party with this leader. So she's stepping down at the next election. Why would they do that, these people who are opposed to a no-deal Brexit? What possible motivation can there be for these people other than sincerity and understanding of the issues? And then you glance across at the other side, you've got people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, reduced to maligning consultant neurologists live on the radio. People like Dominic Raab claiming that the negotiations are going well, while Dominic Cummings stands accused of describing those negotiations as a sham. It's incredible, the depth of the dissembling and the deceit. But the only light I can shine on it today is through that question which nobody was prepared to answer honestly yesterday. Because I think the ludicrous anti-Semitic lines about George Soros is funding it for reasons that I can't explain, but I don't need to explain, because as soon as I inflate these anti-Semitic tropes about people like George Soros, then people will turn their brains off and just start cheering along. The kind of people, forgive me, who are still wanging on about hand towels and pollution 3.5 years after the vote. Kind of people, the caller I referred to, who wants Nigel Farage to be Prime Minister. That's fine. Presumably there are plenty of people out there who don't understand anything, who are still supportive of him politically. But for the rest of us who inhabit reality, why would Dominic Grieve, why would Nicholas Soames, why would they be contemplating a vote against their own party? What reason have you got apart from honesty, sincerity, integrity and decency? Even if they're wrong, which they're not, they're honestly wrong, unlike Michael Gove, who was wrong when he said that Operation Yellowhammer document was from earlier this year. He was wrong, but he was dishonestly wrong. So there's a difference, of course, between a mistake and a lie. But when Prime Ministers are getting cheered for lying by very, very, very prominent and senior journalists, we've all got a problem. How do we solve that problem? You've got to have another referendum. Leon's in Edenbridge. Leon, what do you think?
Hi, James. Yeah, I'm a bit nervous, but yeah, I would prefer we'd had a second referendum. I mean, I'm 18, so I was only 15 when we had the first vote, so I didn't get to actually have a say. But I would vote to remain.
Well, I presume most 18-year-olds, but not all by any stretch of the imagination. But I'm interested in your personal perspective, because that's 3 years of the most febrile and in many ways insane politics that I can remember seeing since I started my politics A-level at roughly the age you were when the referendum happened. So were you particularly engaged 3 years ago in politics?
Somewhat, yeah, but since the vote, I've been more and more so.
And can you make sense of it? If I said to you, if you had to explain, what's happening? Why are we still having ludicrous debates about things that aren't true?
I really can tell you at this point.
No,
but,
sorry, I can't.
But I'm really baffled by it at this point. But it kind of scares me a little bit.
Mm. Yeah, I can see why. Because you have not just cabinet ministers knowingly lying, prime ministers knowingly lying, but you now have the people you rely on most in the country to at least give you a helping hand in knowing what's true and what isn't true, cheering for the lies. Why don't you want an election? Why do you think an election wouldn't clear things up?
Well, because an election, I think, would just be branded as like a second referendum, a bit like how the European elections were.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be a second referendum, because I can easily see people who would really rather not leave with no deal voting for Boris Johnson because they're so spooked by the prospect of a Jeremy Corbyn premiership. So it doesn't become an honest question about European Union membership any more than the European elections, the European Parliament elections were. It's got to be. I mean, in a logical universe, regardless of how you felt about this, if you were confident about the will of the people and you were on the Leave side talking endlessly about the will of the people, you'd love another referendum because it'd double the strength of your argument. And if you're on the Remain side, it'd be the last roll of the dice to stop this madness. You'd want a referendum as well. Who wouldn't want a referendum?
Well, the people who think they're going to lose.
so young and so untender, Leon. Perfect, of course. Who wouldn't want a referendum? The people who think they're going to lose. 10 minutes after 11 is the time, 0345 606 0973, which is a complete reversal of the last time round, when the people who called the referendum did so because they thought they would win, and then they lost. So be careful what you wish for, might be the lesson. Michael's in Sydney, Australia. Michael, what would you like to say?
G'day, James. How are you?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
Look, as a person of British heritage, and stuck down here in the colonies, I'm just really curious to understand. I mean, I listen to your program regularly. Yeah. I've followed with quite astonishment the many callers that you've dealt with so patiently, who are happy to be lied to and admit to being lied to and enjoy being lied to. And I'm trying to understand, as a person who lives in Australia and is not part of your environment, how has this come about?
Well, I think I can answer this, but only relative... sorry, carry on. Can
I say, like most of the explanations that, I have read, for instance, this goes back to the Iraq War, austerity, Blair, all of these, catchwords, or descriptors. They seem to be necessary to me to describe the culture of lying or the happiness and the embracing of it, but they're not sufficient understanding. Why is it that people are so happy to be embracing untruth?
I took a while to understand what was meant by culture wars. And the moment I fully understood what was meant by culture wars, and I use the phrase footballification to describe what I think gets filed under similar territory as culture wars. The call, it was not that long ago, and I'm a little bit embarrassed it took me so long to see this so clearly, and as ever it was my callers that provided me with the clarity. I asked a bloke, in the context of Donald Trump actually, not Brexit. He was obviously lying. He was claiming there were no protests about his presence in London while delivering in a speech in a room outside which lots of people were protesting about his presence in London. But he just straight to camera, barefaced lie. And I had the privilege of taking a call from someone who would answer the question you've just asked. I said, why do you like being lied to? Why aren't you cross that you're being lied to? And his answer was, because it upsets people like you. And then, of course, you start to try to clarify exactly what is meant by people like you. And it doesn't matter. That's where footballification comes in. So what culture wars have created, and the Times reports today, Rachel Sylvester in the Times today suggests that they're already focus grouping things like trans issues and wondering whether or not they can use them as leverage in northern constituencies to sort of whip up even more negativity and division in the hope of securing a vote. People are persuaded that they're on different sides. What I've done on this show over the last 3 years is ask them for the reasons why they think that, and they have, to a man and a woman, failed to provide any answers. But it doesn't matter, because you know what it's like at the football or the cricket. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the other side do. Your team is the best. Your team is better. And anything that happens that hurts the other side, even if it's your team cheating... Sorry, that was a bit close to home there, Michael.
That's okay.
Cheating
That's
in the cricket.
Fine.
So even if they get the sandpaper out and rub their ball, your lot are going to defend it.
I lost faith with the Australian team back with in the Shane Warne and Steve Waugh years.
Oh, fair enough.
Those guys were cheaters, basically.
Oh, hang on. No, there might have been a little... but anyway, I don't want to have an argument about cheating in cricket. The point was you are exceptional. Most Australians are not going to change their allegiances or their loyalties after one of their players is found to have cheated. They're not going to suddenly start cheering England. And that's what's happened to politics. It doesn't actually matter who's the better player, who's telling the truth, who's using sandpaper to rough up the ball, who's being honest, it doesn't matter. matter anymore because if my lot tell a lie, it upsets your lot. And I think that's the best answer to your question I've got. They like being lied to because of the nature and identity of the people that the lies upset.
Could I just ask you one more question?
Yes, anything you want.
And that's a wonderful answer that you've given
it's the
me.
best
Thank
I've
you
got.
very much.
No, well, thank you very much.
I just want one more question. Is just simply, aside from your actual, your public duties on your program and so on, was there a moment, within your just life as a normal person, as a human being, when you realised that something had gone, like a moment just when you realised, oh my God, everything has gone wrong with the United Kingdom? Have you had a moment like that?
No.
Obviously, you're exposed to that all the time with the callers.
Yeah, but
not in your personal life.
What you mean? My fears for the future?
No, I mean, has there been a point over the last 10 years that there's been an evolution, a change in the nature of the United Kingdom,
right?
Of its right.
Yes, there has. No, I have.
From what you're doing,
yeah,
where you've gone, in your own personal life, you've gone, something is really awry.
I don't know that I can separate my personal and political or professional life in that way. But yeah, I mean, things went horribly wrong when they started treating Nigel Farage like someone who deserved to be breaking bed with respectable politicians and people. Probably when Joe Cox got murdered shortly after he unveiled that disgusting poster, that's when I knew something really bad had happened to Britain.
And that was a horrible moment.
And he was back on telly, 24 hours later, whipping up anti-refugee, anti-immigrant hatred. That's when I knew so. But I wouldn't say it was broken forever. Nothing's ever broken forever. You can always fix things. It's what gets me out of bed in the morning. Thank you, Michael, for the kind words and the brilliant question. Kind of why wouldn't you want another referendum, given that we haven't had any clarity and you don't even have to scratch the surface. You can just rub it with a licked finger to reveal the complete U-turns and reverse ferrets undertaken by Leave campaigners. Today we focused on Michael Gove claiming in 2016 that we would hold all the cards and that there was no prospect whatsoever of us leaving the free trade area, which we will leave at the end of next month if there is no deal. So, mistake or lie doesn't matter. The point is that if you got a 52% vote in favour of eating the moon because you'd been told it was made of cheese, and then you got to the moon and it was made of stone, would the will of the people still insist that you eat the moon? I like that. Let me try another one. If you asked 100 people whether or not they wanted to eat the contents of that box, and you had two sets of campaigners, one saying it's full of dead rats and one saying it's full of delicious marshmallows, okay? 52% of people vote to eat the contents of the box, believing that it's full of delicious marshmallows. They open it. Remember, everyone has to eat it. They open it. Turns out it's full of dead rats. Does the will of the people really demand that all 100 people eat a dead rat? Or does it change because the contents of the box were misrepresented by the people telling you to eat its contents? I could do this all day. Don't worry, I won't. Amanda is in Rhodes, the Greek island. Amanda, hello, what would you like to say?
Hello, thank you. I was just taking a drink of water then.
Ligo Nero.
Here, so thanks for talking to me.
You're very
yes.
welcome. Carry on.
My concern really is with the whole voting process we have in the UK and the mess that it is. As an expat, we don't have an MP. We have nobody who represents us.
Gosh.
I've been away from the UK now for 13 years. I last lived in the area where I'm registered to vote when I was 18 years old, and I'm now 50.
Yeah.
And I have no links to that area of the country.
And yet your only bond then is emotional. I'm being the devil's advocate here because I understand your point. But why should you? I mean, I don't have any say over the government of Greece, so why should you have any say over the government of the United Kingdom?
No. Well, I do still have a vote. I am still British. I'm still a British passport holder. And I still
where do you cast your vote then?
with that within the EU. I have to cast my vote in the place where I was last registered to vote in the UK.
Right, but that's true.
Which for me is South East Cornwall.
Yeah, but we all live in areas that we'd rather live somewhere else if it meant that we'd have a more meaningful vote. I don't think I'm sounding ungracious now, but I don't quite appreciate your plight, Amanda. I don't. De Catalaveno. I don't quite understand your plight because we spoke to the fellow earlier who lives in I can't remember where he lived, but he said my vote's worthless anyway because it was in Stratford-upon-Avon where you could put a rosette on a mule and one party would win regardless of what the other party did. So you're not in a unique position, or being an expat doesn't exacerbate your plight. No.
But then I look at the fact that most European countries do actually have MPs for their expats around the world.
Does it?
France,
but that's a valid grievance. There you go.
11 directly elected MPs.
So representing the interests of expats rather than representing the residents of North Cornwall.
Yes.
Got you.
Yes. They have 11 MPs directly elected in France, and they have 12 senators as well as.
And I think I read that London is by population the 4th or 5th largest French city. I may have got that slightly wrong, but it adds to your point. Anyway, that's for a different day. Forgive me. I now understand your complaint, and I am on your team. And when the campaigning starts, I will line up foursquare behind you, but with you, alongside you. What do you feel about election versus referendum, given your misgivings about the
personally, referendum.
System? Right.
Yeah, our political parties are such a mess right now. Who would anyone vote for? Let's face it.
And the referendum would at least provide clarity.
At least provides a chance to make a difference.
Because you've got one side saying the people want this no deal. You've got the other side saying don't be ridiculous, no they don't. So why would anybody not want to ask the people?
Well, exactly.
Yes.
You only don't want to ask the people if you don't want the result that you think it's going to be.
And you'd think they'd have learned from last time when everyone thought they'd lose and they actually won. So they should be the ones beating a path towards the referendum door because they can do it again. They can do it again.
Exactly. And at the moment, we've got an awful lot to lose here if there is a no deal.
Yes, except Greece often gets cited by idiots. I beg your pardon. Greece often gets cited by people who haven't got a clue what they're I'm sorry. Greece often gets cited by Brexiters as a reason why we should leave. It overlooks the fact, of course, that the bailout of Greece undertaken by the European Union was as a result of their membership of the euro. But as I said, the facts trouble these people. How does our decision to leave play among your Greek friends and acquaintances?
Interestingly, we actually had a small protest yesterday in Rhodes.
Oh, really?
And we had lots of Greeks come up to us and express their support.
Yes, for your desire to reverse.
Democracy is broken. It is crazy.
Yeah. And yet Greece should be, if you were to believe some of the headbangers, Greece is the best example available of why we need to leave immediately.
Yeah. One Greek gentleman did say, he said, we voted to leave. He said, but our government did the sensible thing.
God, that's a box of worms, can of worms even, box of frogs. 25 minutes after 11 is the time. That is what governments are supposed to do. It's why referendums are troublesome. Amanda, I enjoyed talking to you, and I apologise for not understanding your original point a little quicker. 0345 6060 973. This is my favourite text of the day. What a rubbish analogy your rat marshmallow box thing is. The point is that no one would know what was in the box until the choice of the decision had been implemented. You silly old sausage. I told you what was in the box. Everybody told you what was in it. I've been telling you what's in the box for years. Even after the referendum, your lot have been claiming to know what was in the box. Now we know what's in the box. You're more than welcome to eat your dead rat, pal, but I think it's a little unfair to expect the rest of us to, especially as you told us it was full of marshmallows. 11:26 is the time. Stephen is in, Castellhallu. Is that right?
You said it a bit better the previous time you said it, James.
Well, I learn, I learn by increments. What would you like to say?
You just said it worse this time.
Oh, I said it worse this time?
Yes.
Okay,
the previous time you said Castellhallu, which is correct.
Castellhallu.
That's not bad.
What do you want? Quel voulez-vous?
Well, could I ask how this rat is going to be prepared?
No, you can't. Fricasseed. Ratatouille. Stop messing around. Why did you ring in? Election or referendum?
The question is referendum or general election, and I say referendum because a general election shouldn't be about one issue.
No.
There are decent people, Conservatives, Lib Dems, Labour, on all sides. But if you reduce the argument to it's only about Brexit, then whichever side wins, if a side were to win, I personally think there'd be a hung government.
I think they're probably...
They think they've got a mandate for whatever the other things they want to do, but they're not campaigning on that basis.
No, I mean, I think you're right, obviously, but of course you're being objective and rational, and that's not a sneer at anyone who's not being objective and rational. It's just a reflection of perhaps not naivety, but politics doesn't really work like that. So the politicians are going to do what they think suits their purposes best, which means people claiming that people voted for no deal don't want to ask them that question specifically. They're hoping that a Johnson versus Corbyn contest might allow them to get over the line without asking people whether they actually want the thing that you described, the no-deal thing. So they'd be doing it deliberately. They'd be recognising the reality of what you described, but doing the opposite for the reasons that you explained.
But that's why I'm saying that a referendum does keep it to one issue, and a general election... Also, of course, I have a vote in a referendum, which I don't in a general election, for the same reason as the Greek lady was talking about.
Amanda.
And I would vote again. On that subject, of course, I think a lot of the people over in Europe, I'm sure you've met people, in fact, I remember hearing you talking about it one time, who, even though they live in Europe, voted for leave. I don't think so many would be tempted to do that anymore. And the reason they voted to leave, of course, is because, being British, they didn't see themselves as foreigners.
No. I mean, we usually reach for the Costa del Sol on this one, perhaps cliched or something like that, But yeah, people living in Spain, immigrants in Spain voted to leave, for the UK to leave the European Union because there are too many immigrants in the UK.
Yes, because they're British, they're not immigrants. Immigrants are people who look a bit different, who perhaps wear the sort of flowery stuff that Romanian women wear, and or perhaps have slightly brown skin.
Oh, the people on Farage's posters.
It wouldn't affect, that disgusting poster.
Yes.
Absolutely disgusting. You know what I always think would be an interesting thing to do? When he put that poster up, has anybody ever thought of tracing some of those people in that photograph?
Finding out where they are now.
What they are contributing to
idea.
The society they're now in.
That's a good idea, actually. I shall float to the possibility. Might be a little bit tricky, and I don't think any of them were destined to come here, actually. But of course, that didn't stop the propaganda from being put out there. I don't know who you'd go to look into that. 29 minutes after 11 is the time. Catch up with Theo Usherwood shortly. I'm not going to summon him just yet because we're heading towards the news headlines. A little more of your thoughts on this. And speaking, of course, of the people who voted Brexit for reasons of immigration, front of the queue construction workers. Historically on this programme, I've taken call after call after call over the years from people claiming that their livelihood had been compromised by immigration. So, again, I share with you news that today new orders in the construction industry have seen their biggest drop for 10 years last month. And the lack of business optimism in the sector has not been so bleak since December 2008. So, again, if that was your reason for casting your vote to leave, it's changed. It's been rendered wrong, that reason. Things will be worse for you, not better. But they still want to hold you to your vote. They still want to make you eat what's in the box, despite the fact that they told you it was full of marshmallows, and it turned out to be full of rat droppings. Where the possibility of a general election is increasing, or has increased in the last 24 hours. Some very strong reporting from a Daily Telegraph correspondent suggesting that all these claims of continuing negotiations or a deal getting closer are a, quote, sham. That's the word Dominic Cummings reportedly used. Downing Street have denied that, but we know that Downing Street, or at least cabinet-level ministers, are prepared to lie in order to propel this no-deal nonsense, because Michael Gover's already done so, along with Boris Johnson, the co-leader of the Vote Leave campaign. So, in the interest of democracy and clarity, what is the best way to find out whether or not there's a mandate for no deal? That's all. You can't claim that there is, because all I have to do is find one person who says I voted leave and I don't want to leave with no deal. That's all, just one person. I could probably find you a million if you gave me 5 minutes. So what is the best way to find out whether or not there is a mandate for no deal? Election or referendum? 0345 6060 Andy's in Glastonbury. Andy, what would you like to say?
Hello. Can I have a few little sub-points before I make the main point?
No. Sorry.
Regulations. EU regulations.
I said no. So election or referendum?
Right. Neither.
Right. We said we weren't going to do that today. Alex is in Leeds. Alex, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Alex. Very well indeed. Election or referendum?
Initially, I nail Michael List of the Mass very quickly. I'm a Labour supporter and a Remain voter.
What does the Labour supporter mean? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you like Jeremy Corbyn?
I haven't got time for that, and I don't want to get sidetracked because that's a different conversation.
No, but I don't know what Labour supporter means in the current context, that's all.
Well, over the last... what are we, 1994? So the last 25 years, I've been a member of the Labour Party.
Right, fine, yes.
I voted for Tony Blair in the leadership election back in 1994.
No, that's fine. I won't push you for a number on a scale of 1 to 10. I understand.
Well, no, it's fine. But ultimately, nothing would give me more pleasure than to see, the back and the end of this, this wretched Tory government.
Yes.
And, for months, I would have favoured a general election. I wasn't confident Labour would win it. But that would have been my preferred route.
Yes.
However, given the shenanigans of the last week or so and the last 24, 72 hours, for me, now, this is going to sound odd, what I'm about to say, I actually agree with Tony Blair on this one, which is, the referendum is a single issue. General elections, which can be single-issue elections. Remember Ted Heath back in, was it 72? Who governs Britain? The unions or obviously the Conservative Party, and he found out. 74 actually, wasn't it? Elections cover a multitude of policies, and I don't think a general election should be confused or conflated with the issues of a referendum. I don't want them to be bound up by that. So personally now, I would err on the side of a referendum, which would simply be voting on a deal, if there is one, which I don't think there will be, because I agree with everyone who's, all the news reports saying that there's been no genuine attempt to negotiate and discuss anything with Brussels and the EU. Either no deal or remain. Those should be the options on the ballot paper. But I think, let's keep it clean. A referendum, whether to agree a deal, remain, or go crash out on no deal. That will be my view.
And I mean, it's a bit of a rhetorical question, but why would anybody claiming to be supported by the quotes "will of the people"? Why would they be opposed to asking the people how they feel about the changed circumstances?
Well, there's a couple of things, and again, I've been following this as probably as closely as you. I think there's a fear that they might lose the argument, because I know there's various opinion polls saying, Professor Sir John Curtis is excellent on this. Views probably haven't changed that much over the last 3 years about, whether Leavers have become Remainers and vice versa. If anything, there's been a swap, but it's still saying around about, 50-50, 52-48, whatever. So there might be a few more don't knows, but it is an absolute fact, as you well know, because you cover it, ardently on this show.
Yes.
We now know the facts.
Well, do you know, you mentioned facts, and I've referred a few times to Operation Yellowhammer this morning, and I'd missed the fact that the latest version of Operation Yellowhammer was due to be released by Michael Gove today, actually, but it got pulled last night, and it's been leaked to the Daily Mail, of all places. So you would think, if you were a dyed-in-the-wool leaver, you'd think the fact that the Mail is now printing this stuff would be pertinent, but again, we're reverting to an expectation of rationality. But the warning is major disruption for months, even if we spend billions on contingency plans. Public protest, counter-protest may absorb significant amounts of police time. Northern Ireland will be hit particularly hard. Paramilitaries potentially benefiting from an increase in smuggling. The availability of certain types of fresh food will decrease in a reasonable worst-case scenario. And so it goes on. And that was leaked to the Daily Mail last night. It's a 150-page assessment.
Gove's wife works there, doesn't she? So maybe
that's true, yes.
He may have leaked it to Sarah Vine. But no, very quick point, and I want to see if you can try
just for the record, that was facetious on the part of Alex, because if Gove has decided not to publish it, it's highly unlikely that his wife would have published it on his behalf. But carry on.
Well, I want you to just try this, if you may, with a leave voter if they dare to ring up. So, I'm a Democrat, and
yes.
I accept that Remain lost. I've got no problem with that, and I'm not going to go into the fact that Vote Leave got found guilty of cheating,
breaking electoral law. Yes,
exactly. But at the end of the day, the referendum was binary. It said Leave or Remain, and so it talked about what the government should do, but it never actually talked about how the government should do it. So I have no problem. I don't want to leave, but if we have to leave, fine. Let's try try and agree about how we leave, and no two leavers can agree.
That is
on the how.
That's been true for 3.5 years.
If you can get them to at least agree on that point, because I can agree Remain lost.
Yes.
You know, it's clear.
Yes.
But can you explain to me how we're going to leave?
What did you win, and what will that entail? So
me,
and then you've got
the
the worst actors, of course, in the whole process, lying about what they said themselves in the past. Farage saying if it was 52-48 would be unfinished business, and spending the entire campaign talking about Norway and Switzerland. Now claiming he's in favour of no deal. I mean, the dishonesty is weapons grade. Weapons grade.
I was on last week with you, and I talked about, in this post-truth age, which has been going on for ages, and they have no shame, these people. But you talk about the emperor's new clothes. It was ever thus, but now they have the gall and the cojones, whatever, where, they hold the electorate in contempt, not just the Leave side.
But that is it, and that is what does scare me, actually, is that contempt in which they hold the electorate. That old line of Anaya in Bevins about the whole purpose of conservatism in the 20th century being to persuade Labour to use their vote to keep wealth in power. You look at the contempt with which Dominic Cummings must look at the British people. I'll get them riled up about immigration, tell them a lie about the NHS, and appeal to their basest instincts, and we'll win this referendum, and they did. And then Johnson gets into Downing Street and says, who are we going to hire to pull the strings? How about that bloke that won the vote leave, won the referendum by lying and cheating and breaking the law? Let's get that lot in again. And that's terrifying, because and what terrifies me, and I know people won't like this analysis, what terrifies me is that the people who treat the British public as if they're racist idiots are doing rather well in Britain and America at the moment. So treat them even more like idiots, and you can see why they think they might do even better. 11:44 is the time. Alex, thank you. Jeff's in Bristol. It's going to have to be brief, Jeff. Election or referendum?
Election.
Pardon?
Election.
Election. Why is that?
Yeah, definitely. Well, by and large, when powers lose elections, they replace their leader, and that would get shot of this clown dictatorial leader we have at the moment.
I do know. Don't stop speaking. I mean, don't interrupt me, because when you said that will get shot of this clown dictatorial leader at the moment, hand on heart, Jeffrey, I don't know which party you're talking about.
Really? No, okay. But let's go past that for a minute.
Yeah,
If we go for election,
yeah,
we must have a mandate of whether or not the country wants a second referendum, because I personally believe if we have a second referendum, the view will be very similar.
But that wouldn't matter, because it would be a referendum conducted in full acceptance and knowledge of the facts that, the Cabinet Office has put out Operation Yellowhammer. The government have elected not to release it to the public, while also claiming that they've got public support for their policy. So I think referendum first, then election. You think election first, then referendum. How unfair it is that I'm in control of the microphone. Shall we summon the Usherwood? Summon the Usherwood! LBC's political editor currently galloping towards a phone. We'll catch up with him after this. The lads are led by donkeys, once again doing the work that the rest of us should be doing. Michael Gove, this is on the 11th of March of this year. We didn't vote to leave without a deal. Now, of course, a senior member of a government that claims we did vote to leave without a deal, and lies about documentation put together by his own Cabinet Office. That's what we've been reduced to. It's quite remarkable. What's the easiest way back? Referendum or election? I don't know. Probably a referendum. 11:50 is the time. Any news of Theo? Is Theo hot-footing his way? Are we going to speak to him? Anyway, he's been summoned, so he'll be here. David's in Nottingham. David, what do you reckon?
Well, I don't think there's any point to an election, because the last one that Theresa May had, she called needlessly. She only be able to form a government with the DUP. And then with that, she decided, I'll ignore the DUP, I'll go and negotiate, and then they'll fall in line. They didn't. She didn't get her deal through, and now this is where we're at. So why would anyone think that if there's an election, that anyone will actually believe in what the result of that election was?
I think you've answered your own question, perhaps, if I've understood you correctly. The answer would be because Johnson thinks he'll get a much bigger majority than Theresa May managed, and that means he really will be free to do whatever he wants.
Well, then I think he's misunderstood how much of the electorate would be foolish enough to vote for a Brexit party who have no policies.
But what about... Well, yeah, I mean, I think you perhaps underestimate how much of the electorate would be foolish enough to vote for a limited company with no policies, actually. I think more than you acknowledge or even a... comfortable accepting. Trust me on that. There's plenty of people out there who vote for just the usual sort of racist agitation without any meaningful policies or substantive platform whatsoever. 15 to 20% of the electorate historically. It's more or less a constant, whether they're called UKIP or something else. But here's the problem. Without a general election, we're stuck. Without a general election or a referendum, we're stuck.
Yeah, well, another option is why not have both at the same time? You have two things: election, you vote for someone, and then the other part of the voting ballot. Do you want to remain or leave? And then if the Conservatives get in with remain, then they govern. And
no, you
remain
need it differently. You need a referendum which has. But then you've got this deal. I mean, the whole thing has been rendered ridiculous by the inability of people on the Leave side to admit that there is no deal that's better than no Brexit. They can't, I mean, while they're still pretending. Johnson kind of came close to admitting it, but of course he could have said the polar opposite the next day and get applauded by Daily Mail columnists.
Yeah, but he's too smart in his buffoonery.
Smart is an interesting word. I know why you've used it. Cynical.
He's tactically an idiot on screen, but off screen he knows exactly what he's doing.
Well, you make it sound complicated. He knows exactly what...
It's really not complicated.
No, all he's ever doing is what he thinks will enhance his own position the most. So up until a few weeks ago, everything he did was designed to accelerate or increase his chances of getting into Downing Street. Everything he's done since is designed to accelerate or increase his chances of staying there. And that may well involve not asking the people whose will he claims to represent what they actually want. Because if they told him, his position would arguably become less tenable than it is now. And a general election, with his track record of fighting, winning London, you know, a notoriously Labour city, like most cities, but not all, he is, or was at least, a one-off. He was separate. He was different from the normal political fray. Traditions and truths didn't hold for him in the way that they did for other politicians. I just don't know, and I wouldn't claim to know whether or not that's still true. 11:54 is the time, but they're gambling that it is still true, which means they'd prefer an election to a referendum. And that, of course, opens the door to people who don't want to leave the European Union, and another bunch of people who categorically don't want to leave the European Union without a deal, but would vote for Boris Johnson because they've been so spooked by the prospect of a Jeremy Corbyn premiership. And that's the point at which you recognise the absolute integrity of someone like Dominic Grieve, saying he's prepared to introduce or prepared to countenance, prepared to bring about a Jeremy Corbyn premiership. So profound are his misgivings about no deal. You know, we crash out with no deal, that's generational. You put Jeremy Corbyn in Downing Street, that's one parliamentary term. Presumably that's his logic. 11:55 is the time. Theo Usherwood is on the line. Theo, what's going on?
Should we start north of the border at the Court of Sessions in Scotland, where there is an attempt to prevent the prorogation of Parliament by lawyers? And they've just heard that Boris Johnson wrote a note to Nicky DaCosta, who is, of course, running his legislative affairs in number 10 Downing Street on the 16th of August. And in that private memo...
I think Theo Usherwood has just been taken out of the game by the KGB. I'm not entirely sure what the rigmarole is now. Do we have an emergency tape or something? No. Theo's phone line went down. Let's resurrect it. So hang on, I'll see if I can summon you, shall I?
To the memo that Boris Johnson sent to Nicky DaCosta on August the 16th, whole of September session at Westminster is a rigmarole introduced to show the public that MPs are earning their crust. I don't see anything especially shocking about this prorogation, close quotes from the Prime Minister. The key bit here is, of course, that the Prime Minister made the decision without his cabinet, without any consultation with MPs, that what was necessary in order to get Parliament, to get Brexit through, was to prorogue Parliament, and that decision was made during the summer recess, the middle of the summer recess, in order to prevent MPs, this is the allegation of course, from introducing legislation to stop a no-deal Brexit. This morning, the Prime Minister's spokesman said that if legislation which is being put forward by Hilary Benn and being supported by the likes of the former Chancellor Philip Hammond and former Justice Secretary David Gauke is passed, then it would put the UK into a legislative purgatory where we remain within the European Union. The point that is being highlighted by the Prime Minister's spokesman is that the European Union would be able to set conditions to any extension up until January the 31st, and that Boris Johnson would have to accept that extension regardless, and he wouldn't, and it would under this legislation, of course. There is a further possibility of the European Union, of course, extending beyond January the 31st, but that would, if it were to happen, be subject to MP's approval within a 2-day period immediately after that.
They could also say no, couldn't they?
They could also say no, and it only takes one member of the European...
What, you mean one member can veto something that would then immediately prevent the other 27 or 26 members from doing it?
Yes, and there has been...
Well, hang on a minute, that changes everything, doesn't it? All of these people talking about control and all. You mean that we as members could veto pretty much anything, Theo?
Well, it depends. On this particular case, then, yes, there is the possibility...
Can we veto the hand towels, the 437 laws about hand towels that have crippled us as a country and prevented us from assuming our rightful position ruling the waves?
There is qualified majority voting on the budget, which of course would take out any need for a veto, and that was something that was highlighted by Jean-Claude Juncker at the beginning of the summer when Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party said they could possibly go back to Europe and try and sabotage their budget and appointment of the Commission.
No.
So yeah.
They wouldn't do that, would they? They hate sabotage.
So that's where we're up to at the moment. Labour, of course, big question marks about what they're going to do. Around half of the Parliamentary Labour Party have made it very clear to the Whip's office that they are not prepared to sanction voting for a general election.
Why not? In a nutshell, in a sentence, why not? Why? Because, usually the opposition exists to get an election. What's different today?
Because if there's an election, then the danger is that Boris Johnson could change the date of the vote until it's after October the 31st when we leave the European Union.
But Boris Johnson's reputation for honesty and trustworthiness is second to none. Why would they possibly fear that?
Well, it's quite interesting this because I actually asked a question about the gap between the Fixed Term Parliament Act vote taking place on Wednesday lunchtime-ish after Prime Minister's questions, and then the dissolution of Parliament that would obviously come after that. There is a space of time when it would be possible for Boris Johnson to change the date of the general election, and so it happens after we leave the European Union on October the 31st. Number 10 spokesman, of course, saying that simply wasn't going to happen.
Yes, so watch this space. Just, I think perhaps it was my fault. I didn't give it the reverence it deserved. That Nicky Da Costa memo.
Yes.
Just talk us through the significance of that again.
So Boris Johnson sent his Director of Legislative Affairs, a woman called Nicky Da Costa, who of course previously worked for Theresa May and then resigned because of Theresa May's position, a memo in which he said he did not think that the prorogation of Parliament was something that people should be too shocked about, and he described it as a rigmarole by MPs to simply show that they're earning their salaries. And therefore, he made a unilateral, the key bit is, James, that he made a unilateral decision without consultation with his cabinet.
Yes.
Because, of course, it's worth remembering that
does that mean that they misled the Queen?
No.
No.
It means that people like Sajid Javid, the Chancellor, and people like Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, and Amber Rudd, who, of course, spoke out vociferously against the idea that Parliament could be prorogued in order to force through Brexit, weren't even consulted.
And then retrospectively they had to defend the thing that they'd previously described as an affront to all of our democratic norms.
That's the one.
Theo Usherwood, many thanks indeed. It's 12:01. Here's I think we'll try and do this question. I was going to move on to something else, but there's very little else worth talking about. And I'm not here tomorrow. I've got some personal business to take care of. I'll be back on Thursday, so I'll fill my boots today on all the shenanigans that are unfolding. Also, I'm doing Pointless Celebrities this afternoon. If you've got any quality advice, can you just let me know? I've got a word up my sleeve. Moscovium. Moscovium. It's one of the new elements on the periodic table. And there's another one as well, named after Tennessee. Tennessine. NSS. Tennessine. If those two come up and you're watching it, it'll be on it'll be a primetime one, won't it, if it's the celebrity one, so it'll be on a Saturday night. That's my little nod to you. That's my secret hello to you, that is. Moscovium and Tennessine. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. Paul Krugman is a Nobel Prize-winning economist who, the way I said that, you're expecting him to appear on the line now, aren't you? No. Who I follow on Twitter. And he has just tweeted something quite clever. He says, even if you support Brexit, the UK government's attempt to keep contingency planning secret should outrage you. This is like planning for a possible hurricane, and people should know what to expect. In fact, it's a lot like storm planning, since the main short-run concerns involve disruptions of the flow of goods and the things people might do to prepare, like stockpiling crucial items, would be good for the nation, not destructive speculation. So this is really important, all right? And again, it's one of those moments where I wonder whether having been so passionately committed to one side of the argument means that the people who most need to heed me now would really need to, are going to be more sceptical. But why do you think this government can't tell us the truth? Or why won't it publish its own impact assessment? This is fascinating. This is the most perfect example, actually, of the stuff I've been straining to describe to you over the last couple of years. Because it's the same as it was when Theresa May was in Downing Street, and they dined upon the rhetorical flourish that Theresa May was somehow a Remainer. Right? Well, she was. I mean, she campaigned for Remain, explained the problem in Ireland, actually, and then promptly forgot all about it during the duration of her premiership. But the question Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, asks is why won't they tell us about their own assessments and their own plans? And that throws Jacob Rees-Mogg's disgusting behaviour yesterday into an entirely different light, doesn't it? Because David Nichols, a consultant neurologist who contributed to Operation Yellowhammer, specifically in his area of professional expertise, medicine and neurology, was roundly insulted by Jacob Rees-Mogg on this radio station yesterday in the most remarkable of terms. Not remarkable to me, because I don't think it's that hard if you don't suffer from forelock-tugging deference to see exactly what Rees-Mogg represents. But for those of you who thought that he was some sort of paragon of politeness and virtue because he talks like a pantomime toff, it must have been a real shocker. I presume he's still reeling from the sense of betrayal. Because he was speaking to one of the people that has been putting together those documents. And this is, of course, what transpired.
Morning, David.
My name's Dr. David Nicholl. I'm a consultant neurologist. I was actually involved in Yellowhammer and drafting the plans of mitigation for a no-deal Brexit in March. My question to you, really, having been involved in writing the plans of mitigation and having whistleblown because I felt they were unsafe, is what level of mortality rate are you willing to accept in the light of a no-deal Brexit?
Well, I don't think that there's any reason to suppose that a no-deal Brexit should lead to a mortality rate. I think this is the worst excessive project fear, and I'm surprised that a doctor in your position would be fear-mongering in this way on public radio.
Can I remind you, I wrote the plans of mitigation.
In mitigation? Well, you didn't write very good plans if you hadn't worked out how to mitigate, had you? It's fortunate they're being written by other people now who are serious about mitigating rather than Ramona's.
Well, except to stop you there, in the Sunday Times yesterday, the Royal Colleges who were involved in contact with Department of Health have not yet been approached.
I think it's deeply irresponsible, Dr. Nicholl, of you to call in and try and spread fear across the country. I think it's typical of Remainer campaigners, and you should be quite ashamed, I'm afraid.
So, the two things there. The first, of course, is his failure to explain why we need to mitigate for something that he insists is going to be good. Either he doesn't understand what the word mitigation means, or he got caught with his trousers down and ended up making a fool of himself again on national radio. But more interestingly is that notion that there are now other people doing the mitigation plans, and they'll be much better than they were when the consultant neurologist that he so vilely insulted questioned him. Because, I mean, what do you want to know about these plans? I want to know what they are, James. Oh, yeah, so do I. So they are doing plans. They're better than the last lot of plans, apparently, but they won't tell us what they are. So Paul Krugman's question then, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, who Jacob Rees-Mogg no doubt considers to be an inferior economist to him, just as David Nicholl is presumably an inferior neurologist or an inferior medical expert to him. Krugman asks this fascinating question. Even if you support Brexit, the UK government's attempt to keep contingency planning secret should outrage you. The question that begs, of course, is why are they keeping it secret? I want you to answer that this hour. OK, I'll carry on taking your calls on referendum versus election. But this is the Daily Mail, all right? And although the new regime at the Daily Mail bears little resemblance to the old regime, they've still got people like Richard Littlejohn on the payroll. Richard Littlejohn publicly applauding Boris Johnson for lying to us last week. So it's still obviously got one foot squarely in that camp. They have got this story. Their political editors have got the document that Michael Gove was supposed to release today, but elected not to. On the question of medical supplies, it says the reliance of medicine and medical products supply chains on the Straits crossing, that's the channel, the thing that the current Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab didn't realise was so important to our import-export market until he became the Secretary of State for Brexit. It makes them vulnerable to severe extended delays. 3/4 of medicines from the EU come via the channel. While some products can be stockpiled, others cannot. The Department of Health is developing a multi-layered approach to mitigate these risks. So what are they doing to mitigate these risks that kick in, well, 7 or 8 weeks, isn't it? It's the end of next month. Those 54 days or thereabouts. And what I want you to do now, and I know I've spent 3.5 years alienating you and condescending you and insulting you and calling you a racist. I haven't, but that's what they tell you I've done because they don't want you to see the light. Give me a ring and tell me why you think the government won't tell us what they're doing to employ Jacob Rees-Mogg's own words to mitigate the negative impact upon this country and upon the NHS of a no-deal Brexit. Then you have to ask yourself whether they really care about you at all. Why won't they tell you what these plans are? Bloke who wrote the plans gets insulted by the Leader of the House of Commons. Claims that there are now better plans in place, but we can't tell you what they are. Does that ring any bells? A bit like the solution to the British border in Ireland, isn't it? Yeah, we've got a brilliant solution, we just can't tell you what it is yet. So this should be, and I don't know, I guess if I was ever going to give up on this, I would have given up by now. So I'm never going to give up on this. This should be the penny drop moment for you. All right? Why won't they tell you? A Nobel Prize-winning economist on the other side of the Atlantic draws a parallel with planning for a possible hurricane, knowing what you should and shouldn't do in expectation of a hurricane. The things people might do to prepare, like stockpiling crucial items, would be good for the nation, not destructive speculation. And this, this is a more profound observation, more profoundly important question than I realised. This is it now. This is the absolute essence of Brexit. Because the people that flogged it to this country are now in charge, they can't tell you how bad it's going to be. Full stop. End of story. Unless you've got a different answer. Why won't the government publish its own impact assessments? Assessments that warn that next month we could usher in public disorder, travel chaos, shortages of fresh food, medicines, petrol. This is a leaked government document produced by the Cabinet Office. It's a Cabinet Office that serves Boris Johnson, chair of the Vote Leave campaign. A cabinet containing the most headbangery of Brexit headbangers. Priti Patel, Dominic Raab, They're all there. So why can't they tell you how bad it's going to be? Or why can't they tell you what's going to happen? Answer, because it's going to be very bad. Why can't they tell you that it's going to be very bad? Answer, because they are the key players in the campaign that told you it was going to be brilliant. And that should be the end of the matter. We have another referendum. We send people like Farage packing, and we get on with the business of reuniting our country and looking after people who need to be looked after. Unless you've got a different answer to that question, all right? Why won't they tell you? 0345 6060 973. So with the last lot, when they did tell you, or when stuff got out, you could, I understand, fall for the claim that, oh, it's all Ramona propaganda. But you got Rees-Mogg there, claiming that they've got better people doing it now. So why can't they tell us what they're doing? If you can't answer that question, you've got no choice but to take my answer. My answer is pretty good. They can't tell you because it's all bad, and they told you it would be good. So by releasing Operation Yellowhammer, Michael Gove would have to say, I'm terribly sorry. Best case scenario, I got everything wrong. Worst case scenario, I've been lying through my teeth for the best part of 3 decades. Can you think of anyone else who's been lying through their teeth for the best part of 3 decades about European Union membership? Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Prime Minister. 19 minutes after 12 is the time. Why won't this Leave-supporting government, led by a Leave-supporting Prime Minister, release the Cabinet Office's own analysis of the possible impact of a no-deal Brexit that they claim the will of the people supports? I mean, just think about this. The will of the people supports it. The government supports it. Everybody wants it, apparently. 52% of the population voted for it. And the Cabinet Office has done some really heavy lifting and hard work describing what it might entail, but they won't release it. They won't tell us. Why not? Your thoughts. And priority to Leavers on this one, past or present, whether you've changed your mind yet or not. 0345 6060 973. It's supposed to be brilliant, but they won't tell us the impacts. No wonder they don't want another referendum. Robin's in Manchester. Robin, what do you reckon? What's going on here?
Good afternoon, James. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good, mate. What's on your mind?
So this might be very sceptical, but I hope you'll give me leave for that.
Yes, of course.
By not releasing the reports, that creates more uncertainty, which obviously causes a drop in the pound and sort of dodgy markets, etc., etc. And now, as my understanding is, that is one of the main conditions under which Rees-Mogg's dad's book explains how to make money.
Yeah, I see what you mean about giving you a bit of leeway. This might explain the motivation of a tiny number of people who are heavily invested in a falling pound, or who might make who might be able to treat the United Kingdom like a fire sale.
But the other side of it, of course, which is a lot more straightforward, is that the reports just say that it's going to be horrific.
Yes.
And I was just saying to your producer as we were coming in terms of medical shortages and all that sort of stuff. My dad, you've actually talked to my mum before about orchestral holidays.
Oh, lovely. Yes, in Manchester, I remember.
My dad, yeah, exactly. My dad, who she was obviously talking about as well, had a heart attack a couple of years ago through work-related stress, but we won't go into that.
Sure.
So he is on regular medication, takes his cocktail every morning and night, and obviously therefore talks to his GP, talks to his pharmacist, plural, and it's already started. There are already reports of medicines not being available, be it through there simply not being, the shipping isn't good enough and there's uncertainty, or be it through companies that are stockpiling so that they can perhaps provide in the case of a no-deal Brexit. But in order to make sure they've got enough drugs to do that, they're stockpiling them now, so there's a shortage now. There's all sorts of different layers to it.
And, I suppose a few insults from Jacob Rees-Mogg in the great scheme of things are not that important to you, except tonally and in terms of what they may mask.
Oh, yeah, it's infuriating. But
it's sickening.
The danger with people like that is that because he's such, for want of a better word, a caricature, is that people then don't take him seriously, but it is serious.
No, but people do take him seriously because of his comedy accent. You see, this is the great discovery of me about the last few years, is that we haven't moved on at all since Tudor times when it comes to the forelock tugging and the cap doffing of a certain type of English person. And I do think it's confined I do think it's confined to England. So, I mean, your answer, I don't know if Leavers are going to ring me with genuine attempts at answering the question of why they won't release these impact assessments, which have, according to the Financial Times, been watered down anyway. But the political editor of the Financial Times reports today that even after they'd been watered down, maybe that's what Rees-Mogg meant, Robin, that we're currently watering down the warnings that we got the experts to do in March. Now they've been watered down. Michael Gove's been warned that releasing them would still alarm the public. How can they claim to be acting on the will of the people when they won't tell the people the facts?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the question.
I'm not going to argue with that one.
No, well, it's not a point, it's a question. How can they claim to be enacting the will of the people when they will not tell the people what their own Cabinet Office is warning about? 0345 560 60973. OK? Harry's in Acton. Harry, what do you think?
Hi, I'm just literally phoning up about my wife. My wife's on HRT. She can't, the drugs that she's on, or patches,
yes,
she can take the tablets, but the patches that she's on, they're no longer available. She's been to 4 chemists. They haven't got any in stock, and they don't know when they're going to be available again.
Did they say why?
No one's saying why. They're just saying we can't get them anymore.
I don't know if this is Brexity. I do know, and I don't know why. I think we were planning on talking about the menopause, and Sheila Fogarty did last week, and I must have been reading around on it, because I know that the British Menopause Society, I'm just seeing if I can find it. Here you go. There have been availability issues with many HRT products. Some of these are related to manufacturing shortages, while others are related to supply issues. The British Menopause Society has been reassured that these are temporary shortages which pharmaceutical companies and their suppliers are trying to resolve. That was on that was the 9th of August 2019, and you're telling us they haven't been resolved yet, effectively, and you're worried that might be linked to what Jacob Rees-Mogg described as Project Fear Ramona type issues yesterday.
Maybe I'm on the I'm looking at it all wrong.
No, mate, you're not. There's a shortage there. It's been recognised. It's not anecdotal because it's not confined to your wife. It's something that the British Menopause Society have felt fit to comment on, but they commented on it on the 9th of August, and you're reporting that they haven't... oh, hang on, I've got another one now. I've got another one now. This is from The Telegraph, of course, that bastion of anti-elite journalism. Hormone replacement therapy medication is being rationed, with women being warned they could struggle to get hold of patches for nearly a year. Again, I'm not sure there's a link to Brexit.
There's those fears that the tablets can cause breast cancer, so a lot of women do go on the patches.
Yes.
Which do not have that side effect. So, she can't get the patches.
I mean, you know, I'm not going to fall into the trap of seeing what I want to see. I can't see any reason to suspect that this is linked to Brexit at the moment. The clever money seems to suggest it's linked to the cessation of production in of one of the big suppliers in China has stopped producing because of issues manufacturing the glue that they needed. But I hope your wife finds... If anyone else has got any advice for Harry and his wife, then I will share it, either privately, we'll hang on to your number, Harry, or publicly, depending on the pertinence. But I'm just sorry to hear that. 26 minutes after 12 is the time. So here it is. The reliance of... This is the government. This is the Cabinet Office. This is the stuff that Rees-Mogg was referring to when he insulted David Nicholl on this radio station yesterday. A couple of people, and I don't know if they're real, suggesting that David Nicholl wasn't real himself, wasn't actually a doctor, wasn't... I mean, he's photographed in the newspapers today. I don't know where anyone would get the idea that anyone would ring into LBC pretending to be a consultant neurologist who contributed to Operation Yellowhammer if they weren't. Some people have to ring into LBC and put on fake accents and pretend that they're someone else because the presenters won't talk to them in their real guises. A chap called Femi got on LBC the other night, had to pretend he was from America because the presenter is terrified of the truths that he tells. But quite why anyone would pretend to be a consultant neurologist is beyond me. But that's what Brexit has done to you. You're now reaching desperately for something that allows you to cling to the notion that you haven't been mugged. Now people are ringing LBC pretending to be doctors, except for the fact that the newspapers followed up on that story from Nick's show yesterday, and his photograph is now published. But hey, get cross with me, don't get cross with the people who lied to you. Anna is in Harlow. Anna, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I picked up the phone originally when you were asking the question about whether we thought it should be a referendum.
Or an election.
And having thought about it quite a lot, I've come down firmly on the side, if it has to be one or the two, of a referendum.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? In all honesty, I mean, in a rational universe it does, but God knows when we stop living in a rational universe.
I don't know. I mean, I just think if it's a election, you know, it will be a Brexit election, and I think there's too much opportunity for votes, whichever side you're on, to be split.
Yes,
you know, so if you're a Leaver. Can't believe I just said that word.
No.
You know, you could be split between Tory, Brexit Party if you're a Remainer, you know, and it's never going to give the answer, and we'll just continue the argument. So that's why I think out of the two, a referendum, just to sort of try and settle it once and for all.
And why wouldn't that? I mean, this is the astonishing thing, isn't it? You've got a Nobel Prize winning, a Nobel laureate pointing out that by not telling us how to prepare, they're endangering us. The people who told us it would be brilliant are in charge now, so I can see why they wouldn't want to tell us that it's going to be awful, but it's happening at the end of next month, and it could be. I think that David Nicholl yesterday, when he talked about mortality rates, was obviously reaching immediately for the worst imaginable case scenario where people might die as a result of medical supplies being compromised. But remember, we've got a foreign secretary now who only discovered yesterday how important Calais to Dover was as an import-export thing, and he got promoted.
I mean, I'm laughing, but I actually honestly feel like crying. It's just so awful, you know, I just can't...
And there it is. That is all they've got left now. Your Ramona tears, you see, are the only thing left about why this is a good idea.
I'm very happy to be called a Ramona, and I will not stop moaning about this.
And it's your salty tears that make it all worthwhile. As people bury their relatives, they'll be supping your tears at the wake and claiming this is what they wanted all along.
Well, I just don't care. Call me a name, I don't care. I'm a Remainer through and through, and I won't stop until Article 50 is revoked. You know, I think it's pretty obvious why they don't want to tell us about.
You think it's pretty obvious. I think it's pretty obvious. We need to hear from people on the other side of the argument as to why the government won't release its own assessments. Here's one go. Obviously, people sending in texts haven't got the guts to ring in because they know that their texts are a bit rubbish. We are negotiating with the EU, so you don't show your hand, good or bad, when renegotiating. Simples. You certainly are. I mean, here's the problem. Once you allow very sinister individuals to claim that medical warnings from actual doctors are not in good faith, I mean, that's really serious. What you say, if you hope that they're not true, is, I really hope that's not true, and my government will be moving heaven and earth to assuage these fears and to address these concerns. That's what you say to a consultant neurologist who has written Operation Yellowhammer and who is worried that people might die. Matt Hancock, the Secretary of State of Health, of course, refused to rule out the possibility not that long ago that people might die. And who do you speak to? Who do you go to for your medical expertise? Do you go to consultant neurologists or do you go to Jacob Rees-Mogg? And OK, if that's an unfair question, what about the van drivers? What about the people that actually do the deliveries? Kieran, who contributed to this programme what feels like many moons ago and gave us the first indication of just how gross some of the misrepresentations were, he tells me that with medical supplies, the most important area is the perishable goods. Now, they have to come over with the engine running. There's only I think it's only boats that will let you do that. I don't think you're allowed to leave your engine running on the train, but even so, it's the refrigeration that is crucial. So when you hear people like Rees-Mogg wanging on about airdrops, remember, we need to airdrop, in Rees-Mogg's universe, we need to airdrop medicines into the country because things are going to be better than they were when we didn't need to airdrop medicines into the country. These concerns are acute and they're real. But equally, you want them to be wrong. Nobody wants it to be true. So how do you deal with warnings from experts? Well, if you're civilised, if you care about your fellow countrymen and women, if you're honest, if you're decent, then you pay attention. And then you go away and dig and delve and desperately search for reassurance. You put in place the things that will reassure the public who are concerned about these warnings. Or, in the case of Jacob Rees-Mogg, you insult the person making the warnings, claim that there are better measures now in place, and refuse to reveal what they are. Doff Cap Tug Forelock. 12:38 is the time. Ian's in Kettering. Ian, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
Yeah, my partner, I've spoken to Sheila previously, but she has a rare genetic disease, as does our stepdaughter and other members of the family, as it is a genetic disease. This condition is treated by various drugs, but those drugs are targeted on the condition breakpoint type because it is a genetic disease. So one Fabry sufferer in a family would take one set of drugs that might come from Canada or the USA to then, unfortunately, our family culture of the disease, unfortunately, means that the drugs we have to use is a drug that comes from the Netherlands.
Right.
It's called Fabrazyme. And this drug is delivered to us literally before the clinician comes out to deliver the drugs intravenously.
Right.
And they mix the drugs. They are stored in the fridge. They're delivered by, like you've just mentioned, by couriers who have refrigerated vans.
Yeah. I didn't know that. I didn't know that you were. I just read Kieran's tweets. I didn't know you were going to come on and be so close to the story I
was just listening to, and I thought this is.
I feel bad now.
This is exactly my point.
God.
Now, my aunt, my partner's aunt, has just come back from Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, where they're one of the specialist services who treat rare genetic diseases, and Fabry disease is one of those. They've said that they're investigating the concerns that we've got, and what they've come back with this week is that at the moment we have 6 months of stock left in the country for everybody.
Right.
But that will deplete. And with the no deal, if any drugs are delayed, that has an immediate impact for those patients because these drugs are given to these patients bi-weekly. So every other Thursday, my partner will have this infusion. If those drugs are delayed, then it longers the period between when she would have one infusion to the next. Her condition then will take a dramatic downturn, and pretty imminently. In males, it's far worse. Males suffer obviously because it's the X chromosome. They can actually be in a crippled state.
Oh, mate. I feel for you enormously and for the family, and I desperately hope that these things don't come to pass. But you remind us of something that we missed at the time, when people started claiming, incredibly dishonestly, that they knew all along there was going to be short-term disruption. And we all let that slide a bit, didn't we? But what you remind us of is that for some people, short-term disruption is permanent.
Exactly.
I had never thought of that.
She's a CAMS practitioner in Cambridge at the moment, looking after, referrals that are coming through from GPs for children with various different mental health conditions. If she's unable to do that duty because she's so poorly and has to stop work, then that then has an impact in that sector. I also work in CAMS. I work for a mental health hospital with children with eating disorders. If I have to stop working to look after her as a full-time carer, who's going to replace me? We're just two individuals that randomly now are impacted by short delays in drugs, but then that has a concatenation for other people who inadvertently now fall victim to us not being available. And that works across other services. It all stems out.
Yeah, of course it does. How do you, and this will sound like a leading question, but I'm genuinely interested in your responses, because you sound, you're not politicking, are you? You're just measured, informed and concerned. If Jacob Rees-Mogg was here, he would probably accuse you now of fear-mongering on public radio. Now, David Nichol didn't get a proper chance yesterday to respond to that vile accusation. How would you respond to that?
I've personally been trying to communicate with Nigel Farage. Even on your shows, I've been trying to make contact with him. I want a response from him.
Yeah.
He's an ex-banker. He's financially motivated.
He's a metals trader, briefly. Let's not go.
He's interested in the financial benefits for the UK of what they believe will happen from leaving the EU.
Is he still? I thought he was reduced to talking about blue passports now. He's given up on claiming that anyone's going to be better off.
But it's just it. People's personal preferences about Brexit, sometimes it appears that they completely overlook that we have a lot of vulnerable people in society. My partner, Elaine, as I mentioned, she's making a difference in her career. She has a terrible condition. She was born with it. She didn't choose to have this. She needs the drugs. if she can't get the drugs, she can't do what she does that she's skilled to do. We've already got a shortage of staff like her in the UK, and we have to go abroad to get them. My hospital in London, we have a large portion of Eastern Europeans doing those HCA and nursing roles, and we struggle to find the resources to do that as it is. And I know a lot of the staff in my hospital are concerned as well, and they're considering leaving to go back to their country of origin because of the racism they're facing. I spoke to a lady yesterday who works in our unit, and she's just come back from Poland, and she's looking to move out to Hertfordshire. And she said that already she's getting the vibe that they're not used to people, you know, the culture of London being multicultural. As soon as you start venturing out a little bit further, you start to get this prejudice that then starts coming to you as well. And
I recognise what you described.
So well for the best 30, 40 years to start suppressing this intolerance and ignorance that we've had historically.
Yeah.
And over the last 3 years, it's just been completely overturned.
Well, of course it has, because it was the only way they could get over the line. They needed to get into bed with the racist rump represented by Farage and his friends. And of course now they have to pretend that he isn't, which is why Farage is getting arguably treated with even more respect than he was before, because they needed his racist voters to get Brexit over the line, and they can't now turn around and say, well, no, we disapprove of people like you again. So things have got worse. As I've said a million times, the minute he got the red carpet rolled out into the media establishment was the minute everything started falling apart. Decency started crumbling, and danger started appearing on the horizon. But now is not the time for you to be worrying about stuff like that. You just want to know where the medicines are going to come from. And Jacob Rees-Mogg has told doctors warning that there might be a problem with those medicines to shut up effectively. He's accused them of fear-mongering on public radio. Doff cap, tug forelock, vote Rees-Mogg. Crikey, nearly done. And you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Well, I've got two questions, which I'm probably going to ask you every day until October the 31st. And they're really, really interesting. You can take these, actually, out into the world at large. These are the two questions. Why would people like Dominic Grieve, Justin Greening, within Parliament, compromise their careers, sacrifice, in some cases, their careers, to prevent no-deal Brexit? What do you think is motivating them? Outside of Parliament, you could say the same about people like Gina Miller. Why would Gina Miller paint a target on her back? One man who threatened her has already been jailed. Why would these people do this? What do you think explains their concern about a no-deal Brexit? I don't think Leavers can answer that question, honestly. I think that is another one of those points where you have to turn your brain off and hope that one of the usual suspects comes along in a minute and gives you a slogan. But the old slogans don't work anymore. Why is Justine Greening sacrificing her political career upon the altar of trying to stop no Brexit? You can't say, oh, Ramona's, oh, George Soros, oh, tears or something. Because the only answer you've got is, crikey, principles and passion, profound beliefs, evidence-based reasoning. That's all you've got. Don't get cross with me. I'm just the messenger. You got a better answer to that question, you know what to do. And the second question, today's question, which is just as, I think, illuminating, is this. They have got a watered-down version of Operation Yellowhammer. That document that was leaked showing that the government was acting on warnings that no-deal Brexit would be calamitous, has now been watered down a little. Michael Gove was supposed to release it today. He's chosen not to after being warned that it would alarm the public. So the people that told you it was going to be brilliant are now refusing to release the information that would allow you to prepare for that thing that they told you was going to be brilliant. Have you got a better answer to that question than the one I've provided? 03456060973. A lot of HRT texts and tweets coming in. Look, I'll change my position if you give me the evidence that I need, but right now I haven't seen any Brexit-related explanations. There's a text here from a GP in Glasgow. 15 out of 24 brands of HRT have been affected. We haven't been told why there are supply issues. There's no information. My personal opinion is that it's Brexit-related. Just imagine the shortages once we have a no deal. I suppose the only way in which I can see it being Brexit-related would be if stockpiling is happening somewhere, and therefore the supply chains have been compromised and changed. Otherwise, I'm sticking to my position on this, that I can't see a Brexit-related explanation. You've got to be honest, especially when everybody else is lying. Jenny's in Poole. Jenny, what would you like to say?
Well, basically, I'm one of nearly 400,000 people in this country who are a type 1 diabetic. I need insulin every day to keep me alive, as they do. I have been trying to get sense out of anybody as to how they're going to deal with this, because our insulin comes in from the EU.
Yes.
There's a shelf life. It cannot be stored after a certain period of time. And I still wait for somebody to tell me this is what we're going to do. And I don't give a tinker's whether I'm classed as a Remainer, a Ramona, a collaborator. I'm talking about my life. I'm not talking about wouldn't it be nice to.
And what you want chapter and verse on insulin imports.
Yeah, because when this all
Please.
kicked off,
Jacob.
Theresa May, who's a type 1, the same as me,
That's correct, yeah.
we were told there's this factory in this country that makes insulin and that will be geared up.
Wrong
Here we
type
are
of
3
insulin.
years later, and my local MP told me last week we're going to bring it in by Hercules. That was what I got.
I mean, that's better than no answer. I'm not being glib, I promise you. You know I'm not, Jenny, but that is an answer at least. I mean, we can't bring it in by Hercules indefinitely.
I just don't believe it. End of.
No.
I mean, we've just had a recent air
Did you pick him up?
display
Did
here.
you do it face to face, or was it over email? And
It was over telephone.
well, and what? I mean, without telling me who your MP is, what?
It was all platitudes. It's going to be okay. It's going to be fine. Well, I'm sorry. We're now, however many weeks out we are, that no longer cuts ice with me, nor with most people that I know who are in the same position. We want definites. As I say, we're not talking about something that's
It's
nice
about
to
eight
have.
and a half weeks.
Well, whatever. We're not talking about something that's nice to have. We're talking
I
about
know.
something that makes a difference between survival and not surviving. And I don't give a tinker's what Rees-Mogg thinks. I really don't.
Well, I do, because he insults you, and he insults your
Well-
concerns, and he endangers you with his arrogance and his
Well, so
absurd.
does Alexander. I mean, come on. Known to you as Boris. I mean,
yes.
you know...
You lost me then.
would... I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
My MP sort of suggested I wrote in, and I thought, well, I'll get it done in Latin. Maybe he'll understand that.
well, yes.
But all joking aside, what do we do?
What do we do? Well, we turn to the experts, don't we? We look for the impact assessments that have been commissioned by the actual government, but unfortunately they won't release them.
Yeah, I'd love to believe that.
Well, I would as well, and I'll do my best to find out for you, even if I have to pick at the studio when these people are appearing on other people's programmes. I will find. I'll try to find out, but I do know what he said yesterday. What he said yesterday was that doctors making similar warnings were fear-mongering on public radio. 12:54. I'm with Jenny. I liked her tone, I liked her vocabulary, and I liked her manner, but I can't. It's no joking matter. It's no laughing matter. You've got about 59 days by my reckoning, so it's what's 8.5 weeks. Oh, there'll be some short-term disruption. Well, it won't be short-term for people whose health is affected, potentially permanently. Sanjay's in Harrow. Sanjay, what have you got?
Hi, James. I just want to give us a different perspective as well. I think Jacob Rees-Mogg is sort of flying at sort of 50,000 feet high, and he really needs to come down to ground level where real people live. And the evidence for that I give you is that I'm a children's nursery manager, so I look after, and my team look after children, between 6 months and 5 years.
Yes.
This week, Monday, I had a child starting with me who is severely allergic to gluten.
Okay.
And one of the things, whilst we were discussing with his mum about, do we take him on or not, I said, I need 2 EpiPens in my nursery at all times,
yes,
in case he has a reaction. And EpiPen, is an auto-injector, so there are others available, obviously, as well. She sent me a WhatsApp message to say that... she's having difficulty obtaining them on prescription.
Right.
I'll read you exactly the 2 lines here. What's happening? She said, I managed to get a prescription for 2 EpiPens to keep at nursery. Currently a shortage due to Brexit, so trying different pharmacies.
But why would it be due to Brexit? I mean, far be it from me to defend Brexit, but why would it be? Do we know why it would be?
I don't know why, but my sort of because we have another child as well with a similar thing, except he's now out of the allergy, but we've still kept his pens because they're still in date and we can use them. Essentially, I think it's because these things are quite expensive. A private prescription on this is like £40 each. Yeah. And I think there's definitely a supply issue. And I can't see any other reason apart from it being Brexit, because most of these things...
No, I know you can't,
anyway.
and maybe I can't either, although the HRT patches seems to have something to do with manufacturing processes in China. Do you know Gordon Brown mentioned EpiPens in his speech yesterday? Half the medical supplies we use come through Europe. If we're denied EpiPens or other important medical devices because of a slowdown at ports, then we are putting lives at risk. Thankfully, the Cabinet Office has published its... Well, no, it hasn't, because Michael Gove won't release them, and he's one of the people that told us everything was going to be brilliant. What would it take now? I mean, today's show's been magnificent, if you'd allow me to say so, because of that penny-dropping element. That they told you it would be brilliant. They won't publish the details of what it's really going to be like, but they're claiming that this is what you wanted all along. How can anybody still be on their side of the argument, Sanjay? I don't understand.
They can't be. I think what we need, because obviously I think we're heading for an election, I think what we need is effectively like a fact-checker website, because there's going to be so many claims made by, every political party on Brexit and other things. It'd be really great if someone could set up a fact-checker website where someone, Joe Public can go and say, Jack Weeks-Mogg said this, let me check that fact. Someone independently checks the fact, puts it out and says, here is the reference where I got this information.
They tried,
You go and independent go and check it.
I mean, the problem with that is that if you've learned anything from the last few months, it's that leavers won't trust anyone who tells them stuff they don't want to hear. That's the whole point about Ramona rhetoric. Even yesterday, Rees-Mogg using that word, Ramona, when talking to a consultant neurologist about his own contributions to the government's own impact assessments, Operation Yellowhammer. You get all the fact-checkers you want, mate. When you've got a pencil like Rees-Mogg claiming that everyone who says anything that he doesn't like the sound of is acting in bad faith, and the public haven't got a prayer. And that level of weaponised dishonesty, dissembling and deceit is endemic in our government now. Used to be an exception. You could spot the liars a mile off. Now, looking at that cabinet, you need a magnifying glass to find someone telling the truth.